Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I'm Gary Polland.
And I'm David Jones.
This week on Red, White, and Blue, the midterm elections in Texas, focusing on Southeast Texas. We have lots of interesting races, and we have two insightful guests who will help guide the discussion and give us some insight as to what's really going to happen in November.
And don't forget
what's
the ballot.
important.
Don't forget the ballot propositions.
Yeah, and I won't forget that either, David. First, Barbara Ann Radnofsky. Barbara is a terrific lawyer, constitutional author, and I call her my favorite liberal. And I say that, Barbara, because you are a passionate liberal and you believe in things, and I admire that. And we have Joe Brettell. He's a communication strategist in the Prosody Group, and he consults primarily with corporations.
That's correct.
But hopefully he'll be sympathetic to my position. I want to welcome both of you on behalf of David and I. And my first question is, do you all agree this is the most important midterm election in our lifetimes, like we keep hearing from the national pundits?
I do. I feel strongly about it. I think the country faces a lot of threats right now from within and without. I think some are taken very seriously. I think some not. And for Harris County and for our local region, I think it's extraordinarily important in terms of things like flooding and infrastructure, how we pay people, how we treat people. I think it's key. Healthcare is also a big issue.
I think it's certainly the most watched midterm of our lifetime. I think what's really interesting about, you look at the rise of Politico, you look at the involvement in the 2016 election, that's really carried over till now. And what you have now is a much more informed, passionate, but unfortunately very polarized electorate. And both sides, I think, are ready to rumble this election year.
Barbara, there are 200 women running for the House in the midterm elections. 155 of them are Democratic women, 45 are Republicans. Given what you may be thinking is going to happen on Monday, when the lady accuser of the judge is going to be heard, what do you think the possibilities are that this will be like a 1992 Anita Hill reaction to the voters and become a female landslide?
And I would object as rank speculation. I think the better question is this going to be a year of the women because we have so many women candidates?
Well, I'll rule on your objection. I'll sustain it in part. And I'll say that it's a good point that there are a tremendous number of women who are running both regionally and nationally. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's the fact that we can still comment on it means it's particularly a good thing. It's good to have diversity in the folks who run. And there is that, too. It's not just a lot of women running. There is a full ballot here, especially in Texas, for Democrats, and that is rare. That is rare. And I think it shows there's increasing interest, and I think what it also shows is we may have a heck of a turnout this election, and that's my hope. And so if I could divert back to the midterms, what I would say is that increased turnout is going to, I think, be one of the major factors in what will happen on Election Day. And of course, once early voting starts October 22nd.
And in line with that, Joe, so turnout. There are games played by both parties to get the other side to not come out to vote. In this case, the Democrats are going to spread the word that Greg Abbott, who is your favorite candidate for governor, is going to win big, so you really don't have to vote because it doesn't matter. And that, of course, impacts down ballot races. And the Republicans may play the same games with the Democrats. So what's your take? 2016, the pollsters got it wrong, and the Republican turnout or the pro-Trump turnout was much higher than anyone anticipated. Can we look for that this year?
Yeah, I think building on the previous sort of conversation, if you look at the story that was written by Charlotte Alter in Time magazine earlier this year, a great profile about all the female candidates and really the diverse number of candidates, male or female, that are beginning to declare for office. I think one of the effects you see is Donald Trump being elected got people's attention on both the left and the right. And there has been folks that have been motivated to participate in their democracy like never before. So as a result, when it gets to something like turnout, well, let's take a look at the fact that you've got in Texas, yeah, Greg Abbott's probably going to win handily, but you've got a Senate race that's going to go down to the wire. Even locally here in Houston, you've got a number of different issues, a number of different races that are really close. But look, let's make no bones about it. This is going to be a tough year for the GOP. There is a yawning gulf between the male and female generic ballot. Democrats are +8 on the generic ballot. And so the GOP is running uphill. I think in Texas, what I'll be looking for is not so much maybe a widespread Democratic landslide. I just don't think it's there yet. But looking ahead to 2020, looking ahead to the increasingly changing demographics in the state, how much progress do they make? How many inroads do they make? How many new voters come out and actually participate? And I think that's going to be the really compelling story for the midterm.
And let me add something, because you said that Democrats are trying to suppress the vote.
Well, when I say is they say you don't have to vote because the race is over. That's what I meant.
That's not true. And they're not saying to people don't vote. The Democratic action right now is building not just in a big election time, but it is an infrastructure that is building for the future, but it is happening faster than anybody predicted, given what great interest is happening both nationally, regionally, and locally. And so I think it is unfair, with all due respect, to say that Democrats are suppressing the vote. It's not happening that way.
They sure were successful in 2016 here in that effort where conservatives just did not turn out and vote, which is a big deal.
The turnout.
You know how many people didn't vote in 2014? 140 million.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Okay.
I wanted to move on from this and talk about. I want to talk about judges. Just throw that in while we still have time. In 2020, we're switching to no more straight ticket voting for judges. Probably a good thing. I think you and I were allies, Barbara, in the effort about a decade ago with Justice Phillips. A bipartisan effort, by the way, to go to an appointed retention system in Texas, where we have a board of Republicans and Democrats, lawyers and civilians.
There's a lot of different ways to have
finding the best, trying to get the best and the
system,
brightest onto the bench and letting them stay. The system we essentially have now is, we have good Democratic judges and good Democratic candidates, and we got bad ones. We got good Republican judges and candidates, and we got bad ones. And unfortunately, the voters are not provided information by any of the media. They really don't get it. And we end up getting stuck with whatever party ends up sweeping. The good and the bad and the ugly getting elected. So I guess my question is, moving toward 2020, is there anything else we can do to ensure that we elect the best and the brightest?
I think it's a matter of voter education. Programs that talk about who the candidates are, programs that say get out the vote and look at these websites and read. What y'all are doing right now on this table as we're doing it is what needs to be done. More education of the voters. Tell them to go out and vote, educate themselves.
Yep.
October 22nd, if I didn't mention it earlier, is when early voting starts. Early voting is important.
It'll be here before we know it.
It will.
Yeah, I think especially locally, most folks who reside in Houston are more likely to know the starting left tackle for Texas A&M than they are their local judge. So I think switching this system and putting in place a mechanism where people have to understand who the judge is and how they affect their daily life is probably going to lead us to better candidates.
But the problem is that judges, you don't just have one judge. The problem that we have is there is a huge selection of judges, and when you go down to the courthouse, any place in Texas, you could get any one of a number of judges, and particularly in the large counties.
That's why I need to raise the standards.
In any of the counties, and what Gary and I have spoken about for decades, frankly, is that election of judges isn't a perfect system. It has some advantages, particularly in the early days of the West. But nowadays, we really need not to have these sweeps in and out of a whole body of jurists who've gotten experience, and they come in just because of what's happened at the top of the ballot.
That's a strong point.
Joe, I've got a couple of op-eds to run by you. The opinion of our colleague Jay Iyer is that Beto O'Rourke has run a perfect campaign, that he is a person of charisma, he's dedicated to the work, he's visiting 254 counties, and he's running against lying Ted. Now, so what do you think are Beto's chances going against Rafael Costa?
Yeah,
Cruz.
So I think, Jay's a smart guy. He knows his stuff. And look, the reality of it is that Beto O'Rourke is absolutely electric. If you've dealt with any member of Congress, it's a varying degree of interaction. And yet Beto, for years, has been the guy that if you met him at an event, at a dinner party, et cetera, would give you his card and shake your hand and tell you to call him. So there's no doubt that if you were going to pick a picture-perfect candidate to run, he would be the guy. That said, I think there's a couple of issues that are beginning to emerge. Number one, the flat-out realities: do not bet against Ted Cruz in Texas. Ask David Dewhurst, ask Donald Trump. The reality of it is that elections are won by being able to turn out your people to the polls, and Ted Cruz does it better than anybody in Texas. The second issue is, and it echoes a little bit of the same problem that Cruz has, but I think if Beto is going to position himself as something different than the ordinary, not your average politician, et cetera, there are increasingly disquieting stories, rumors, et cetera, very effectively being pushed by the Cruz campaign. I will grant you that. But I think that in the closing days, when the Cruz and the National Republican steamroller is going to come after him like never before, Beto needs to do a better job of being publicly forthcoming about everything from how he dressed in his rock band to the incident with drunk driving, et cetera. Otherwise, I think it's probably time to start saying, did he peak a little too soon? Because to this point, I haven't seen a poll that says that Beto is great for anybody except national political writers who seem to love to write the profile about him.
Well, he's 3 or 4% behind.
No, actually, the last poll showed he was 8. But
wait a second about polls. There's polls all over the place, gentlemen.
Yeah, the Reuters poll
there's polls that have Beto winning. There's polls that have Beto losing by a large margin. There's polls all over the place. I say that we don't know what the polls are going to show, and that we act irresponsibly if we start saying someone will either win or will lose, because we are, we're not on election day. We're not October 22nd. Let's let people get out to the polls because they're going to decide. It could well be so close that you guys could be affecting what people do by giving them a false sense of security.
How else will the pollsters get paid?
That's exactly right. We don't need the polls in order to discuss the issues or in order to determine whether or not people are going to get out and vote. Here's where this race is down,
in my take on this race. Beto did really well because Cruz just kind of ignored him, which I believe was a mistake. I think he should have defined him early, which they didn't do, because I believe he's a out-of-step leftist in Texas. That's my opinion, and I know you all may disagree.
Because he wants health care?
No.
Because he wants pre-existing conditions covered?
He's anti-gun.
According to J.R.'s column,
I don't care
all
about J.R.'s
of the
column.
issues that
Thank
he
you.
speaks
Spare
of.
me.
You're
interrupting me.
You're making a speech.
Can I finish my comment?
You're making a speech.
All right. It's my
We
turn.
need to mediate this
Right?
problem.
Right?
David,
These
it's
are
my
silent
turn
problems.
to comment. Okay. Can I comment, or do you just want to dominate the show?
I thought you told me that I had to ask questions only. Go ahead.
I mean, I'm happy to just let them talk and not
All right,
bother
I think
David.
what we should talk about.
Go ahead.
I think we should talk about Nelson v. Paxton, gentlemen. Nelson v. Paxton is an attorney general race of
It's a
great
very
interest.
interesting race.
Good for you.
Very interesting
okay?
race. And by the way, the Democrat candidate is well qualified. I will say that for him.
Nelson is supremely qualified. He's a Democrat, but he has all the makings of a moderate who would work with both sides in the attorney general's spot without recourse to politics. He clerked for a Supreme Court justice who, by the way, was a Republican activist politician and who was an appointee by a Republican, Sandra Day O'Connor. He's got all things going for him. He's very close. You can't call that race. And Paxton, our sitting attorney general, is indicted for securities fraud.
Yeah, and he has been for like 3 years. They can't get
And
it to trial.
he asked for a speedy trial and then has abandoned that issue and now wants to get it put off for as long as humanly possible.
I don't think there's any way any statewide Democrat is going to win anything. But
I think it's an issue worth discussing. I think, a candidate like this, a candidate like Beto O'Rourke, the other House candidates we'll talk about later. Look, there's a couple of things that I think are interesting to point out here. Number one, there is some great potential on the Democratic side in Texas, where I think it's going to take a bit of leadership both locally and on the national level is to say, hey, let's not put these guys into races that they can lose and never hear from them again. Where is a place within the party infrastructure in Texas, within the party infrastructure nationally, that we continue to introduce these guys to donors, that we continue to raise their profile, keep them on TV, et cetera? That's how they're going to move forward. And for the Texas GOP, it's a very interesting time, because if you want to see what happens when a state party gets a little too sure of itself, I give you the California Republican Party, which over the course of 2 generations managed to alienate both the influx of new and educated workers who are moving into the state, sounds familiar, as well as a rising second and third generation class of Latinos. You now have 2 generations after the gubernatorial reign of Ronald Reagan, a California Republican Party that is all but extinct. And the Texas GOP, I think led by Governor Abbott, if he wins, needs to step back and say, what are the issues that as people move in from the coasts, move in from other parts of the country because of the jobs that Texas provides, because of the affordable cost of living, how do we sort of recenter our party to focus on the sort of down the middle kitchen table issues that people care about and stop trying to cater to the hard right of the party, which is going to take us down the path of the California Republican Party.
Well, you have to take a look at what's going on. You can't stay static. You can't assume just because you're winning what you won 4, 8, 12 years ago are issues or politicians that will continue to win. So one of my lines that I've used and said, and the Harris County Republicans this cycle were actually very successful. I have 16 minority candidates running for judge, and part of the reason is there's a number of us who said our ticket needs to look like Harris County. We really need to change.
But just to put those faces on isn't enough.
Well,
when you've
quality
got,
too.
When you've got top of the ticket, you've got Nelson, you've got Mike Collier, you've got people up there who you may doubt could win, but what they're doing, win or lose, is affecting the county races here. You've got good qualified candidates on the Democratic side running for county clerk and for district clerk. Those are what you guys may think of as low-level offices, but they're very important to everyday people.
To George Soros,
they're very
who wants to
important. You've
control
got Diane Troutman running for county clerk. You've got Marilyn
Against Dan
Burgess.
Stannard,
You've
who's
got
the incumbent.
Marilyn Burgess running for district clerk. That's how our courts are run. That's the way you
Against
meet our
Chris-
judges.
Has to happen, though, at some point, there has to be a point where one of the tech billionaires in San Francisco, one of the financiers in New York, takes a look at the Texas Democratic Party and says, you know what? I am going to pour $1 kajillion into the infrastructure it's going to require to be competitive. Because
last cycle, Soros poured in over $1 million into Harris County in order to primarily get control of the DA's office, but that helped Democrats significantly.
Sure.
And I think Republicans were caught by surprise. I don't think they were ready for that influx of money.
And this reflects back on the Beto race. I just don't think the infrastructure is there yet on the Democratic side to have the kind of turnout mechanism that it would require for an upset.
And you've got to add one other thing that I will get in here now. If you run on personality and the other side lets you and you have the better personality, you're going to win.
Well,
and so here's what I think. Coming back to that race,
Beto can win under your criteria because
well, he has a better personality. There's no
question.
question. So the big question for me, I think the issue is this: can Cruz get through the debates with people liking him as much as they do now, or as opposed to what has happened Nixon-Kennedy debate? If you looked at the debate and listened to it on radio, Nixon won the debate. You watched it on TV, Kennedy won the debate.
Well, and it's
same
Dan
thing, and this could
Patrick
happen.
will not debate Mike Collier.
Yeah.
Mike Collier.
Because he has no money, doesn't think it matters.
Mike Collier is no, he's afraid of Mike Collier.
He might be, but he's not going to lose. But I'm telling you though, if Cruz tries to win the debate as a debater, and he's a world-class debater. You know, when you debate based on debate. Like speech and debate, high school and college.
In a high school kind of demeanor, but that's not the way.
Oh, I agree. That's what I'm telling you. And that's why I said if Cruz comes in, and tries to wipe the floor with Beto, and Beto just smiles and is friendly and then Cruz can lose the debates, and then he will lose the election. That's my opinion.
I'll tell you what's interesting about the Beto dynamic is that if you go out to what I would consider the traditional strongholds, you drive around Katy, you drive around some of the other neighborhoods, you start to see Beto signs in neighborhoods where you go, I've never seen that before. And so that tells me two things. He's an absolute force of nature in terms of personality, and win or lose.
He's not afraid of any issue at all. I mean, the guy will speak his mind on any issue you want to talk about.
Reality of it is win or lose. The day after, all of the aspirant 2020 candidates for the Democratic nomination are going to be blowing up his phone because he is a prize as a surrogate. But again,
prize as a vice presidential candidate.
Look, if he beats Cruz,
if he doesn't win,
if
he does win,
he's your guy. He is the front runner for the 2020 Democratic nomination.
Okay, well that's great because that's what we need.
The gentleman has been in Congress. It is difficult to say. That it is difficult to claim.
All right, we're going to move on.
We're going to talk about Congressional 7.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
George Will virtually endorsed Lizzie Fletcher.
Good.
Talking about how
the race again. I'm tired
I'm
of listening.
asking whether he read it.
I don't want
and
to talk
whether or not
about
he
their
believes
opinions.
that Culberson is in trouble.
Joe, we want to know your opinion, and we don't care what George Will thinks. He's not on the show today.
Yeah, George Will has long since made it known that he's not a big fan of the current GOP. So I think myself and most other Republicans kind of discount his opinion at this point. Now that said, I think the Culberson race is fascinating for a number of reasons. Number one, look, 15, 20 years ago, prior to the elimination of congressional earmarks, John Culberson would have been one of the gods on Olympus in Congress, sort of deigning to hand out federal money. Right. An issue like Harvey would have been, we would have had the John Culberson Dam, the John Culberson Bridge, and anything else he wanted to name after himself. And I think it's a really instructive lesson in how the GOP has sort of shot themselves in the foot by eliminating earmarks. I wrote a piece a few weeks ago for NBC News talking about how we could break congressional gridlock by bringing back earmarks. And Culberson's a great example. Now, look, on the flip side of this, his opponent has already showed that she can take a shot in the primary from her own party. You look at that district.
No, that was from her opponent got a shot in the party.
You look at her district. You look at that district, and I think it's going to be really interesting
Which
to see.
Hillary carried.
Sure, absolutely, and I think that district is fascinating, right? Because you've got Hunters Creek Village, you've got Jersey City, you've got a big demographic shift, and yet I think this is above all else a report card on Harvey. How do people feel about Harvey? How do people feel
what
about
Culberson did? And
right?
And the other thing, and I live in the district, so I get the mail at our house, and I've seen the mail from Fletcher, and it's all personality based. That's what it is. So again, if Culberson will allow her to make it a personality race, she has a better personality than Culberson.
She's also supremely qualified.
How do you make a personality?
Nobody said she's not qualified.
No question about that.
Supremely
By
qualified.
not talking about any
and it is not,
issues that divide.
It is not just. It is not just Lizzie Fletcher who's supremely qualified. You cannot say that Todd Litton isn't well qualified for what he does. You look at this guy called Carney, who's running out in Fort Bend, Foreign Service officer. He is getting out into everywhere where people aren't usually voting. He's getting out to in a diverse community. You look at Sylvia Garcia. Sylvia Garcia.
That's a gerrymandered Democratic district.
And what she's going to do, and there's a reason it's gerrymandered.
I understand, but we're not getting into that because we have little time left. I want to talk about.
Let me tell you about Garcia turning out the vote. This is not somebody resting on her laurels. She's helping everyone up and down the ballot.
I don't see her spending any money. But I want to talk about the bottom of the ballot, the city of Houston, the two propositions. Pay parity for firemen, which is Prop A. If you support that,
That's
you vote
B.
yes. Is that B? Mm-hmm. Prop A is the voting on the drainage fee yet again. We voted on it 7 or 8 years ago.
This is the implementation of Prop 1. This is the implementation of Prop 1 from before. It's a system by which
I understand. We voted once. I supported it. But you know who the problem is? We were lied to. The money has been spent on personnel. You know how much has been spent on drainage projects in the city of Houston? Of the billions of dollars that has gone into this fund so far with higher taxes? Zero.
Are you
know how
saying
much?
People should vote against Prop 1? Are you
I'm
advocating?
saying I am voting. I vote against because we were lied to. We were told it was a lockbox. We didn't know that the lockbox was picked.
During a prior
and the
administration.
Money was, I understand, but the lockbox was picked, and it continues. It's just so abhorrent.
This is a system by which
I know
you will
what it
be
is.
able. Yes,
but it doesn't work.
Even though you think you know, there may be a million
And
or
they
more
voted,
people listening to this that would like to know.
There's no dispute they stole the money.
You're
Something,
being
Joe?
silly.
They
You're
spent
being
it on
silly.
other
Are you going to file a
projects.
criminal
Do
complaint?
you not want us to talk about the substance of this issue?
We only have 2 minutes.
Can
honey.
I say, I think it's
Prop
fascinating.
1 deserves a yes.
Oh, you and I disagree.
I think what's fascinating
But I still like
in
it.
this
I like
debate
it
and
too.
others is as you see the manifestations of the climate changing, this is a conversation that's going to be going on across the country where people begin to realize that our body of policy and our infrastructure doesn't match what the weather is now throwing at us. And so I think that to me is part of that to me is what's more interesting is if you look at all of the issues in these races, if you look at the issues on the proposition, there is a bit of reckoning on climate change where we're beginning to have this conversation where people are beginning to see these changes wind up in front of their door and go, hey, we're not ready for that, and we need to be.
But you're talking about what I call the old Prop 1 issue, which is the funding infrastructure issue.
we gotta talk about
It sounds
the
like
larger
issue,
You are saying
We don't have-
you are also in favor of it because we need to address
Wait a
it.
second.
Yeah, I think we absolutely, it's an issue that
Good for you.
But this doesn't
Good
do it.
for
All right, how
you.
about the firemen? Do they deserve equal pay or just
deserve how? But I think they deserve it. How do we pay for it? Who's and how do we?
Well, how about public safety is number one and fund public safety before you fund anything else?
No
in the
question
city.
about it. And
They're not
if we can
doing
find
it.
a way to pay for it, absolutely.
It's clear we can't. It's clear we
Yeah,
don't have enough money for that huge
it's not
amount.
Barbara
We
Radnofsky,
can
nice
suffer less.
of you to be here.
Not a priority,
Joe,
Barbara.
nice to have you, sir.
Always a pleasure.
And the mayor won the argument on Prop B, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, you're
It's
wrong.
too expensive.
You're wrong.
Do you want me to rule on this?
Thank you for watching the show.
People will vote.